Chapter 1: The Deep End. The night air was thick with tension, the kind that made every breath feel like inhaling broken glass. The city was alive with a buzz of activity as the motorcade rolled down the streets of New York. In the middle of the armored convoy, the beast glided with an air of invincibility, its massive bulk a symbol of the president's untouchable status. Jack Harper, the seasoned driver with nerves of steel, kept his eyes on the road ahead, his face a mask of calm professionalism. But inside, a storm was brewing. Jack's fingers flexed on the wheel as they approached the Brooklyn Bridge. To any observer, it was just another secure transport across the city, another routine operation in the never-ending schedule of the leader of the free world. But tonight, the routine was a smokescreen, hiding the desperate reality that was about to unfold. The convoy of black SUVs and police escorts, sirens muted but lights flashing, cleared the streets in front of them. No other vehicles were allowed near standard procedure for a presidential motorcade. They would have the bridge to themselves, a rolling fortress in a city of millions. Jack's ear buzzed with the chatter of the Secret Service, their voices crisp and methodical, each word loaded with the seriousness of their task.
All units maintain position, eyes on the prize.
The beast, with its 8-inch thick armor and hermetically sealed cabin, was designed to withstand almost anything. But what it couldn't withstand was the man behind the wheel, torn between duty and the life of his only child. Jack felt the familiar pressure build in his chest, the weight of an impossible choice hanging over him like a guillotine.
Approaching the bridge
Came the calm voice of Agent Porter in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the horizon for any threat. He had no idea that the threat was sitting right beside him. The voice in Jack's earpiece returned, cold and commanding.
Harper, remember the plan. When you're halfway across, you know what to do. Your daughter's counting on you.
Jack's breath hitched, but he forced himself to stay calm. Sarah. Her name echoed in his mind, a cruel reminder of the stakes. His little girl, her life hanging by a thread, and he held the scissors. The convoy moved onto the bridge, the city lights reflecting off the water below. The bridge was a marvel of engineering, a steel giant connecting two worlds, but tonight it would become the site of an unthinkable act. Halfway across, Jack felt his heart rate spike. The moment was approaching, the point of no return. He glanced at the president in the rearview mirror, calm, unaware, trusting. He had no idea that his life was about to be thrust into chaos. The beast rumbled forward, the tires humming on the pavement. The city skyline faded into the background, and the cold, dark water of the Hudson River came into view, its surface like glass under the night sky. Jack's palms were slick with sweat, his mind racing. He had been given his orders, and now it was time to execute.
Now, Harper.
The voice urged, more insistent.
Do it. Drive off the bridge.
Jack's grip on the wheel tightened. His breath came in short bursts as he fought the rising panic. He knew the moment had come, but everything in him screamed to stop. To save his daughter, he had to betray the very man he was sworn to protect. With a sudden violent turn of the wheel, the beast veered sharply to the right, crashing through the guardrail with a thunderous roar. The SUV behind them barely had time to react, its driver swerving to avoid the same fate as Jack drove the beast off the edge and into the void. The free fall was brief but terrifying. The heavy vehicle plummeted toward the icy waters below, the impact imminent. Jack's mind went blank as the world outside became a blur, the bridge, the city, all vanishing as they hurtled downward. Then, with a deafening crash, the beast slammed into the river. The force of the impact jolted everyone inside, throwing them against their restraints. Water surged around the vehicle, dark and cold, swallowing them whole. Inside, the sealed cabin held firm, keeping the water at bay. But the beast was sinking fast, its weight dragging it deeper into the black abyss. The air was thick with tension, the president now fully alert, confusion and fear flashing across his face as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened.
Harper, what the hell is going on?
But this vehicle was designed to withstand far more than a river. The hermetically sealed cabin kept them safe, for now, but time was running out. The air was thinning, the temperature dropping as the water outside grew more oppressive. Jack reached for the emergency beacon, a last-ditch effort to summon help. He pressed the button, and somewhere above, the signal shot out, alerting every rescue team in the vicinity. It was a lifeline, a thread of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. But the voice in his ear returned, dripping with malice.
You think you've saved him, Jack. This is far from over. And your daughter? Well, let's just say it didn't work out well for her.
Jack's heart broke as the realization hit him. He had played their game, but they had rigged it from the start. His daughter was gone no matter what he did. He had sacrificed everything for nothing. No, he whispered, his voice cracking as the weight of his actions crushed him. No, please. Outside, the first rescue divers were already in the water, their powerful lights cutting through the darkness as they approached the sunken vehicle. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights piercing the night as the world scrambled to save the president. Inside, Jack closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He had tried to save his daughter, had tried to do what was right, but the world was cruel, and the stakes had been too high. "Hold on, Mr. President," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Help is coming." But even as he said the words, he knew the truth. Help was coming too late. The beast was a fortress, but it was also a coffin, sinking deeper into the cold, unforgiving river.
Chapter 2: The Jack in the Box. The hum of helicopter rotors sliced through the fog rolling in as a team of operatives descended upon the bridge. The dim glow of the city lights flickered like dying embers in the distance, a reminder of the world left behind. Status report. Agent Emily Hayes whispered into her throat mic, her eyes scanning the scene through the infrared goggles. The silhouettes of her team, black-clad and armed to the teeth, moved like shadows in the night, each one a cog in the well-oiled machine of the United States Secret Service.
Alpha team in position, over.
Came the reply from the north end of the bridge, where two agents had taken up sniper positions, their rifles trained on the massive void in the middle of the bridge guard rails.
Bravo team, set.
Echoed another voice from beneath the bridge, where divers waited in the frigid waters, prepared for the worst. "We've got 37 minutes until the clock runs out." Hayes reminded her team, "We go in, we secure the president, and we get the hell out. Anything goes sideways, you neutralize the threat immediately." A crackle of static interrupted her, followed by a frantic voice.
This is Alpha Lead. We've got eyes on the vehicle.
"Copy, Alpha. Proceed, over," Hayes demanded, her pulse quickening. She motioned for her team to advance, each step measured and deliberate.
NAR BTU mapping picking up 3 signatures inside.
Alpha Lead confirmed.
2 in the front, another in the back. Looks like the president.
Hayes clenched her jaw. They had to assume the worst. Bravo team launched themselves onto the side of the beast, their hydraulic cutters whining as they began slicing through the reinforced steel. Inside the cabin, President Holden's face was ashen, his eyes locked onto the driver. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. The leader of the free world, staring death in the eye, was helpless.
We're running out of time.
Bravo Lead called, his voice strained as bubbles boiled off from the cutting tools.
We need 2 more minutes.
"Hold on, Mr. President," Hayes yelled, desperation creeping into her voice. Cutting through the armor would be no small task. The vehicle was layered with military-grade steel, ceramic, and bulletproof glass, designed to withstand an onslaught of attacks. But against the crushing pressure of the deep, even this mighty fortress would eventually buckle.
Setting up for breach. We'll be using plasma cutters. Time to breach is unknown, could take several minutes.
Understood. Do not compromise safety. This vehicle is your only safe haven down there, Hayes reminded them. But she knew the reality. They were running out of time.
Inside the beast, President Holden felt the vehicle lurch as it continued its descent. The cabin was silent save for the creaking of metal under immense pressure. He was no stranger to dangerous situations, but this was different. There was no enemy to confront, no bullets to dodge, just the relentless approach of the riverbed, and the inescapable fact that he was trapped.
He reached for the emergency comm system, pressing the button with a shaking hand.
Hello, are you there?"
He said, his voice sounding oddly distant, even to his own ears.
We're with you, Mr. President.
Came the steady reply.
We're preparing to breach the vehicle and extract you. We'll have you out of there soon.
Holden closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing. The air was already growing stale, and though he knew the oxygen levels were still adequate, the psychological impact was undeniable. The silence, the pressure, the darkness, all of it combined to create an atmosphere of claustrophobic dread.
Stay calm, sir. We're going to get you out.
Bravo lead assured him, though Holden could detect the underlying tension.
Pressure's building. This is going to get tricky.
Understood. You're doing great. Focus on the task, Hayes replied.
The air in the cabin was becoming noticeably thinner, the temperature dropping. Condensation formed on the windows, obscuring the view outside, though there was little to see but murky darkness. The president glanced at his wristwatch, noting the time. It had been nearly an hour since they went over the edge. 60 minutes that felt like a lifetime.
Estimate another 2 minutes, maybe less.
Bravo lead replied, though they all heard the uncertainty. 2 minutes felt like an eternity in these conditions. Get the medic team ready, she ordered one of her subordinates. I want them on the dock the second he's out of the water.
Yes, ma'am.
Came the brisk reply, as the medics moved into position. The tension was palpable, a collective holding of breath, as the team below fought against time and nature.
I don't have a read. Hayes, I don't have a read.
A stressed male voice alerted. What do you mean? Equipment failure, she thought.
No, I still see everyone outside the vehicle, but there is no heat signature from inside. None.
Breach, breach, breach.
Came the confirmation that the have gained access. Water still rushing in, although largely flooded already. The lights scanning the back of the limo, frantically, then scanning the front, then outside.
It's empty, ma'am.
Chapter 3. The Arrival. The world around Daniel dissolved into a blur of light and shadow. He squinted to see. His body felt as though carbonated soda flowed through his veins, tingling but bursting with effervescent energy. His senses gradually raised to a crisp, new clarity. He was no longer in the passenger seat of the beast. Jack was nowhere in sight. The wailing hum of the cutting tools reverberated initially but is escaping into the distance now, replaced by an eerie silence. Daniel looked around, trying to make sense of his surroundings. He found himself in a large, cavernous room that seemed more like a high-tech hangar. The walls were lined with what appeared to be holographic screens, each displaying different data streams, maps, symbols, and streams of numbers Daniel couldn't begin to decipher. The air was cool, sterile. His shoes echoed on the cold metallic floor, which was perforated with tiny hexagonal holes. There was fluid stirring beneath the floor. Around 30 people standing at the wall displays and sitting behind thin monitors. The insignia on their clothes, a winged eye, a symbol he had never seen before.
Welcome, Mr. Porter.
One of them said in a flat tone, "You've been expected."
In the next room adjacent, President Holden's mind was racing. He knew this place. At least he had heard of it. For years, whispers of a parallel dimension had reached his ears in classified briefings, spoken of only in hushed tones by top scientists and military officials. They called it the overlap. Holden's eyes darted around the unfamiliar environment outside. The people approaching looked like military personnel, but their uniforms were slightly off. Subtle differences in design and color from what he was used to seeing.
Mr. President, we're honored to have you here. Please follow us. There's much to discuss.
Holden hesitated for a moment, then followed, his instincts screaming to stay alert. The room they led him to was circular, with a large table in the center. Holographic images floated above the table, displaying Earth but not quite. This was an Earth with slight differences in geography and structure.
The mission is proceeding as planned, sir. But first, we need to brief you on, well, the overlap.
Unlike Daniel and the president, Jack's arrival was chaotic. He had been separated from the others in the transfer, thrown off course by forces unknown. When the world stopped spinning, Jack found himself in a filthy alley, the smell of rot and decay overwhelming his senses. He staggered to his feet, his head pounding. The alley was narrow, lined with crumbling buildings and flickering neon signs written in a language he didn't recognize. The sky above was a sickly shade of orange smog. The air was thick and tasted a little like day-old eggs. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in rags but with sharp, alert eyes. Jack reached for the sidearm he always carried, only to find it missing. "Who are you? Where am I?"
"We are the Iron Guard. Relax, we are the good guys. You, Jack, are an unexpected but valuable asset. No harm will come to you while you're with me, my friend," he said with a sinister smile in the corners of his mouth. "The name's Darlowinian Garantor, but my friends call me Darlow. You are my friend, so call me that," his smile revealing sharp, jagged teeth.
He turned and walked off, headed downhill. Jack hesitated, but then ran after him to catch up.
"There is much you need to know, but all in good time. For now, just keep your head down. The free zone will consume any morals you might have left in you without hesitation, my friend. Come along, follow me."
Chapter 4. The Crumbs of Truth. The operation to remove the beast from the river was anything but simple. The presidential limousine, with its reinforced steel and titanium armor, weighed over 20,000 pounds, making it nearly impossible to hoist from the river using conventional methods. A task force led by the U.S. Navy's Underwater Construction Team UCT was deployed to oversee the recovery, utilizing a series of pontoon cranes and submersible lifting bags. The pontoon cranes, massive floating platforms equipped with hydraulic winches, were positioned on either side of the bridge, with thick cables plunging into the murky depths. Divers, equipped with specialized cutting tools and sonar mapping devices, descended into the dark water to secure the cables to the beast. The vehicle had come to rest on its roof, partially embedded in the river sediment. Visibility was almost zero, and the cold water clawed at the divers' senses, but the mission was clear: recover the president's vehicle, and with it, any evidence that could reveal the truth behind the attack. As the hydraulic winches began their slow, steady pull, the cables tightened, groaning under the weight. The lifting bags, strategically placed beneath the vehicle, inflated with precision, creating just enough buoyancy to assist in the extraction without compromising the integrity of the vehicle or the evidence inside. Inch by inch, the beast was lifted from its watery grave, emerging like a behemoth from the depths. Water cascaded from its armored frame as it was finally hoisted onto the deck of a waiting barge. Standing on top of the bridge, overseeing the operation with a demeanor that exuded calm under pressure, Stefan was the epitome of a man who had seen it all. His eyes, sharp and calculating, took in every detail of the recovery, but his mind was already working through the next steps. His career was marked by missions that were as classified as they were dangerous. This operation, however, had a different weight. The stakes were higher, and the players involved were more powerful than ever before. As the beast was secured, Stefan's radio crackled to life.
"Bravo team, this is Eagle's Nest. Recovery complete. Over."
Stefan keyed his mic.
Copy that, Eagle's Nest. Proceed with the next phase. Over.
He turned to Emily Hayes, who had been standing silently beside him. Emily was one of the best forensic analysts in the country, but her involvement in this operation went beyond professional duty. She and Stefan had developed a mutual respect over the years, built on countless operations where trust was not just a luxury, but a necessity. Stefan had come to rely on Emily's instincts as much as his own.
Emily, I need you to work your magic on that vehicle. We need to know everything. How they did it, and more importantly, why.
Emily nodded, her focus as sharp as Stefan's. Already on it. The team's ready to start as soon as they get it back to the lab.
Stefan's mind was racing. He knew that the recovery of the beast was only the beginning. The president's fate, the events that led to the bridge, and the unseen forces pulling the strings all had to be uncovered.
As the vehicle was transported back to the lab, the investigation had already started to yield some leads. Initial scans of the beast revealed that the vehicle's communication systems had been tampered with. precision job. The Secret Service had already begun sweeping through every possible angle. The vehicle's black box, still intact, was recovered and was now being analyzed for any irregularities in its final moments. They had also intercepted unusual communications traffic in the days leading up to the incident, including encrypted transmissions that even the most advanced decryption tools were struggling to crack. It was clear this was not just an isolated attack, but part of a larger, meticulously planned operation. The leads, however, were as scattered as they were elusive. There is the missing child, which should have been flagged. Shocking that wasn't picked up by the frequent duress audits. Then there is the chatter from the CIA about a source code named Ghost. That specific source has eluded all the alphabet agencies for years, but is suddenly willing to meet. They had never been this bold. As Stefan and Emily stood side by side on the bridge, watching the barge drift downriver, both knew that they were only scratching the surface. Stefan could feel the weight of the operation bearing down on him. His instincts told him this was just the beginning, a prelude to something far more dangerous. Emily caught his gaze, her eyes reflecting the same determination. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Stefan," she said, her voice resolute.
I know we will, Emily. But this time we need to be one step ahead. Whoever did this, they're not done. As the night deepened, Stefan's mind began piecing together the next steps. The encrypted communications could lead them to Ghost, but they needed a breakthrough. Perhaps a deep cover asset with knowledge of the underground networks, where this group operated. As they drove away from the bridge, the pieces were slowly coming together, but there were still too many unknowns. The recovery of the beast was just the beginning. The real game was about to begin, and Stefan was ready to play it.
Chapter 5: Unveiling the Overlap. President Holden sat in the heart of the control room, a space that seemed to pulsate with silent urgency. Dim lights barely illuminated the room, casting long shadows that stretched and shrank with the ebb and flow of the low hum from the advanced machinery. Around him, a handful of top-secret personnel, their faces etched with grim determination, prepared to brief the leader of the free world on secrets that would have been dismissed as lunacy just hours before. A large screen flickered to life, displaying a rotating image of Earth, but this was not the Earth he knew. Subtle differences: a larger mountain range here, a strange archipelago there marked this as the other dimension. A stern-faced man, General Brooks, stood at the head of the table, ready to begin.
Mr. President Brooks began, his voice a controlled monotone. "What you're about to hear is classified beyond top secret. This information, if leaked, would destabilize everything we know about human history."
Holden nodded, his face unreadable but his mind racing. He'd been briefed on many things before, but never anything like this.
The overlap, or as some also call it, the echo, has been known to select circles for millennia. The first recorded instance of a deliberate transfer occurred during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, around 2580 BC. The construction of the Great Pyramid wasn't just a monument, it was an energy conduit, designed to harness power from beyond our dimension.
Holden's eyebrows rose slightly. The pyramids had been studied for centuries, yet this interpretation was unprecedented. You are saying that the pyramids were built as a kind of portal?
Precisely, Brooks replied. The Egyptians had developed a process, now lost to history, to initiate these transfers. However, their methods were highly unstable. It wasn't until the 1940s, when UAP sightings began to spike, that our scientists unwittingly at first began to tap into this ancient technology. A new slide appeared, showing grainy footage from the 1940s of UAPs darting through the sky. These objects, Mr. President, aren't simply visitors from another planet. They're transfers, craft, and beings from the Echo. Their increased presence marked the beginning of a new phase of interactions between our worlds.
Holden leaned forward, fully engrossed. What about the Romans? The Greek? All these near-death experiences. Ghosts? Are you saying it's all related to the overlap?
There is certainly room for the divine. The overlap comes from somewhere, right? But some of the events described in your world is certainly based off misunderstandings of the overlap, even ancient mythology. The gods like Zeus are well known to have been early transfers. the Anunnaki, described in Sumerian mythology as deities who came down from the heavens, were likely advanced beings who used this technology. There's evidence to suggest they manipulated early human DNA to create or accelerate civilization after the Younger Dryas event, a catastrophic climate shift that nearly wiped out humanity.
Holden's mind swirled with the implications. If this were true, humanity's history wasn't just influenced by gods or aliens, but by entities from a parallel dimension. It was almost too much to take in, yet here it was, laid bare with facts, figures, and undeniable proof.
Meanwhile, Jack was deep into the tablet, his eyes scanning line after line of classified data. Unlike Holden, he didn't have the benefit of a live briefing, but what he was reading was equally shocking. One document caught his eye, a study of ancient artifacts found across the globe. Items that, according to carbon dating, should have existed thousands of years ago, yet were made from materials or used techniques that didn't align with what was known about the respective civilizations. He paused on one in particular, a small, intricately carved object found in Mesopotamia that was made from a metal only recently discovered. How the hell, Jack muttered to himself. The text explained that this was likely an artifact from the Echo, mistakenly or deliberately left behind during a transfer. There were dozens of similar cases, artifacts, structures, the flawless granite vases in Egypt, even entire cities that seemed to have been influenced by or brought over from this other world. Jack's breath caught as he read further. The 22andMe type mass DNA testing is a front. The truth is that research is being done to determine just how far the genes, descendants if you will, go. We now know hundreds of people Earth that have traces of the Echo in their DNA, generationally. Although distinct, it is compatible, much like Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were. There has always been the unexpected, unpredictable transfers of individuals or objects, but they happen extremely rarely. One would not have expected such a substantial impact. It is, however, still possible to tell whether an individual is from Earth or from the Ect were distinct, detectable even today in some isolated populations. This explained the inexplicable how early humans made sudden leaps in agriculture, architecture, and governance. But it wasn't all ancient history. The records jumped to the present, highlighting recent events. UAP sightings, unexplained disappearances, and now, the rebels. The last section was heavily redacted, but Jack could piece together the gist. The rebels had somehow gained access to the transfer technology, and they were using it to disrupt the status quo. Jack swiped to the next file, detailing the involvement of the highest authorities in the Echo, semi-royal twins with a control so absolute, they determined who or what could pass between the dimensions. Their control had been unchallenged until now. Jack's mind raced as he began connecting the dots. Every conspiracy theory he'd ever heard paled in comparison to this. And the most frightening part? It was all true.
Mr. President. Brooks continued, the Echo has had more time to develop technologically. They can now control transfers almost at will, though the cost remains astronomical. Our counterparts over there, at least, the ones in power, have used this to their advantage, but recently. Something's changed. The rebels have broken through, disrupting the balance, and they have one objective: complete control of the overlap.
Holden's stomach churned. If the rebels could disrupt this delicate balance, the implications were catastrophic. And then there were the twins, the enigmatic figures who held the fate of both worlds in their hands.
Brooks took a deep breath. There's more, but I believe that's enough for today. We'll brief you on the rest as soon as we have more concrete intel. But be assured, Mr. President, we're working around the clock to ensure the situation remains under control.
Holden nodded, though his mind was miles away. Make sure I'm kept in the loop, General, and start preparing for every contingency. We can't afford to be caught off guard. As Holden left the room, his thoughts returned to one undeniable truth: his world, was not what he had always believed it to be, and now it was his job to navigate this new reality before it was too late.
Jack closed the tablet, his heart pounding. Jack noted that Darlow and others keep referring to themselves as the Resistance. But that does not feel quite right. He is not sure why, but it is unsettling. He goes along with it and doesn't say anything.
Chapter 6. Ghost in Your Ear. The mountain air clung to Emily as she crouched beside the thick tree trunk, her eyes scanning the dense forest. Each breath was visible, misting in the faint moonlight that barely broke through the thick canopy overhead. The world around her was unnervingly silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Beside her, Stefan remained still, his presence a comforting shadow amidst the darkness. His hand rested lightly on the grip of his rifle, ready to react at the slightest hint of danger. Emily's mind raced as she replayed the information they had managed to gather so far. Every step seemed to lead them deeper into a labyrinth of secrets, each more dangerous than the last. Their current mission was no exception. Host, the elusive source they were about to meet, was said to hold crucial information that could change the course of everything they had been fighting for. But the truth often came with a price, and Emily wasn't sure what this particular price might be.
Stefan glanced at her, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his helmet, but she could still see the concern in his eyes. "You ready?" His voice was low, barely above a whisper.
Emily nodded, tightening her grip on the weapon slung across her chest. "As ready as I'll ever be." Without another word, they moved in sync, navigating the thick underbrush with practiced ease. The rendezvous point wasn't far now, just beyond a small clearing where the trees thinned out. They had been briefed that Ghost operated under tight security, always paranoid about being tracked. Paranoia wasn't a trait Emily was comfortable with in an ally, but if the intel was good, she'd deal with it. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the sound of a twig snapping made them freeze. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the area, finger hovering over the trigger. There was movement in the shadows, a figure stepping out from behind a tree, tall and imposing, with a presence that immediately demanded attention.
Ghost.
The man was dressed in dark tactical gear, his face obscured by a mask. Only his eyes were visible, cold and calculating, as they assessed Emily and Stefan with the practiced ease of someone who had seen one too many betrayals.
Emily and Stefan. So we finally meet, his voice distorted by the mask, a slight electronic buzz underlying his words. I didn't think you'd actually make it.
Stefan stepped forward, his posture relaxed but ready. We need to talk.
There's always a catch, isn't there? Ghost tilted his head. The movement barely perceptible. You want something from me, but you're not the only ones looking for answers.
Emily took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. We're in this together, Ghost. We're all trying to get to the truth.
Ghost's eyes narrowed. You think the truth is going to set you free? It's more likely to bury you. He gestured for them to follow. Come on, we're not safe out here.
They followed Ghost deeper into the forest, where the trees grew denser and the shadows darker. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a small, well-hidden bunker. Ghost keyed in a code, and the heavy door swung open, revealing a dimly lit interior lined with maps, documents, and a myriad of screens displaying surveillance footage. Once inside, Ghost removed his mask, revealing a scarred face with sharp features. He was older than Emily had expected, with graying hair and eyes that had seen far too much. He wasted no time, moving to one of the screens and bringing up an image that made Emily's stomach churn.
These are the twins, Danae and Daniel. Ghost began, his tone grim. The screen showed two young women, eerily beautiful, their expressions blank and unreadable. They're part of the ruling class in the Echo. They've got power more than anyone should have. And they're not afraid to use it.
Stefan leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the image. What kind of power are we talking about?
The kind that makes people disappear, Ghost replied flatly. They're not like you, Emily, they're transfers just like me, but they've been around far longer. They have their, shall we call them, abilities, and by now they are practically untouchable.
Emily's heart skipped a beat. The idea of facing off against someone with that much power is daunting, but the twins, there was something about them that sent a shiver down her spine. Very intriguing and elusive. What do they want? She asked, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her gut.
Back in the Echo, Jack moved through the dimly lit corridors of the Resistance's hidden base, his senses on high alert. The air was thick with tension, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Resistance had welcomed him, but he knew better than to trust them completely. He had seen too much, experienced too many betrayals to take anything at face value. As he rounded a corner, he spotted a small group of resistance fighters huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. When they noticed him, they quickly dispersed, their eyes avoiding his. Jack's suspicion deepened. He needed to find out what was really going on here. He continued down the corridor, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Finally, he reached a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, and he could hear voices from within. Quietly, he pressed himself against the wall and listened. Listening closer. A voice whispered, barely audible.
If they find out about the assets on Earth, what a catastrophe that'll be.
They won't. Another voice interrupted, firmer this time. We've got it under control. The twins are too focused on their own plans to notice us.
Jack's heart skipped a beat. Assets on Earth? This was bigger than he had imagined. He needed to get this information to Emily. But first he had to find out more. Carefully, he pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The room was small, with a large table in the center covered in maps and documents. 2 resistance members were inside, both of them deep in conversation. Jack recognized one of them as a high-ranking officer in the resistance, someone with access to sensitive information. He strained to hear more, but their conversation had shifted to something less significant. Frustrated, Jack knew he had to act quickly. He silently backed away from the door and continued down the corridor, his mind racing. He won't get the answers today. Chapter 7: A Leader in Shadows. Jack's boots crunched against the gravel of the path as Darlo led him deeper into the free zone. This part of the territory felt like a different world from the chaotic streets and makeshift shelters that defined the rest of the area. The air was cooler, the shadows longer. Towering over the landscape was a structure that looked like an ancient fortress made of dark, weathered stone. It loomed in stark contrast to the steel and glass that dominated the rest of the free zone, like a relic of a forgotten era. Darlo said nothing as they approached, his silence more telling than words. Jack's thoughts churned as he tried to decipher the enigma of this place. It was clear this fortress held some significance, a bastion of power amid the anarchic ruins. The iron gates creaked open as they approached, revealing a courtyard where a group of men and women, dressed in dark uniforms, drilled in silent precision. Their movements were fluid, almost mechanical, and their eyes never wavered. These were no ordinary fighters, they were soldiers in the truest sense, hardened and disciplined. Darlo gestured for Jack to follow him through another set of doors, and they entered a vast chamber. The walls were lined with flags, their emblems obscured by the dim light. In the center of the room stood a figure that commanded attention. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a stern face framed by a closely cropped beard. His uniform, adorned with medals and insignia, suggested a man who had seen more than his fair share of battles. His eyes, however, were what caught Jack's attention, piercing and intelligent, with a depth that hinted at more than just military prowess.
Bismarck, Darlo announced, his voice carrying an air of deference. This is Jack.
Bismarck turned his gaze to Jack, sizing him up with a calculating look that made Jack feel as though he was being weighed and measured. The silence stretched, thick with tension, until Bismarck finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. Welcome, Jack. I've been eager to meet you. He extended a hand, his grip firm and unyielding. You've been through a lot. I respect that.
Jack nodded, his mind racing. This man was clearly someone of importance, someone who commanded respect and inspired fear in equal measure. But there was something else, something beneath the surface, an undercurrent of danger that put Jack on edge. Thank you, Jack replied, keeping his tone neutral. Darlo's told me a bit about your organization.
Bismarck's lips curled into a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. The Iron Guard, yes, we're more than just a group. We're the last line of defense for the people here. The only ones willing to stand up against the tyranny of the so-called royals.
He gestured for Jack to follow him to a large table at the center of the room, where a detailed map of the free zone and the surrounding areas was spread out. Markers indicated territories, supply routes, and troop movements. Bismarck pointed to a section near the border.
The twins and their ilk would have you believe they are the protectors of this world. But in truth, they are nothing more than spineless cowards. They hide behind their walls, unwilling to make the hard decisions necessary to secure our future.
At this exact moment, about 200 kilometers away in the Echo, President Holden was nearing the end of another 2-hour briefing. Sir, there is more. Much more,
said a stern, square-jawed man, emerging from the shadow in the corner of the room.
Our enemy is known as the Iron Guard. Once the rulers of the Echo, they are warmongers, sadistic and cunning. They seek to take the overlap, by force. Throughout history, different groups have risen to stop them. The Knights of the Round Table, the Swiss Guard. Today that mantle falls to Naval Operations Special Warfare Development Group. SEAL Team 6 is not just an elite unit, they're the latest in a long line of protectors who fought the Iron Guard in the shadows. In August 1945, we detected the Iron Guard in Hiroshima, preparing to strike. The decision was made to send a message. The Enola Gay unleashed hell on Hiroshima, and then Nagasaki was annihilated. We succeeded, but the fear of their return has been ever present. The world thinks our military is oversized for conventional threats. The truth is, it's built to face the Iron Guard. DevGru is our last line of defense against them. They haven't come back yet, but if they do, we'll be ready. This is why we exist, and why we must remain vigilant.
Barely pausing for breath, the monologue building to a crescendo.
We are not alone. The royal family here in the Echo has shunned them. They operate in the shadows now. We know that they have been waiting, watching, preparing. There is a storm at the gate, sir. But we are ready.
Snapping back to the fortified stone building, Bismarck took Jack by the shoulder. We are resisting the indifference of the royal houses. They are weak and beg for scraps from the table. They do not see that we are not merely the Echo. We should take back that which has been taken from our people. Yes, there will be death. But with it, life will flourish in the Echo.
And as if summoned by a black hole, he turned and walked off briskly.
As it was in the beginning, so it shall be in the end. End. Reverberating against the stone walls of the cavern.
Chapter 8, Weather from the West. The bunker felt smaller with each passing moment, the air thick with the weight of unanswered questions. Emily Hayes stood over the cluttered table, her fingers tracing the edges of photographs and maps, trying to piece together the fragments of a plan. Across from her, Stefan watched with the calm intensity of a man used to dangerous situations. His broad shoulders and muscular frame cast long shadows in the dim light. In the far corner, Ghost remained a silent observer, his presence almost ethereal. The man was a mystery, a figure whose real identity seemed as obscure as the fate of those they sought to rescue. His voice, when he finally spoke, was like the low rumble of a distant storm.
Mount Weather, Ghost said, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the walls, as if seeing through the concrete to the secrets buried deep within the earth. It's more than just a government facility, it's a facade, one of the most well-guarded secrets in the country. The world thinks it's a continuity of government site, a safe haven for officials in the event of a catastrophe. But the truth is something much darker.
Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of Mount Weather, of course, who in their line of work hadn't. It was the stuff of whispers and half-truths, a place of both refuge and conspiracy. But Ghost's words suggested something more, something far beyond the bounds of any normal government operation. "Are you saying that the President, Porter, and Jack might be there?" she asked, her voice edged with urgency. "And that this place isn't just a bunker?"
Ghost nodded slowly. If they survived the dimensional shift, they could have been drawn there. Mount Weather is a focal point, a nexus where the veil between dimensions is thinnest. The government has been using it for decades, experimenting, trying to understand and control these rifts. But what they've done, it's not something you can control.
Stefan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed Ghost's words. What exactly are we dealing with? What's in this facility that we need to be prepared for?
Ghost's gaze hardened. Mount Weather is built into the Blue Ridge Mountains, not far from Berryville, Virginia. It's a massive complex, mostly underground. The public knows about the upper levels, the bunkers, the command center, the communications hub. But beneath that, there's another layer. A research lab. That's where they've been conducting their experiments. where they've tried to bridge the gap between worlds. It's also where things have gone wrong.
Emily shuddered involuntarily. She had always known the government kept secrets, but this was something else. And you think they're trapped there? The president, Porter, Jack? They might be in this lab.
It's possible, Ghost replied. But getting to them won't be easy. The facility is protected by layers of security, physical, digital, and other kinds. They've developed ways to keep the rift stable, but it's unpredictable. And Sarah, if she's alive, she could be caught in the middle of it all.
The mention of Sarah made Emily's heart ache. The missing child had been a haunting presence in her mind, a beacon of hope and fear. Finding her was just as important as rescuing the others. Then we have to go, she said, her voice steady. We have to get in there, find them, and bring them back.
Stefan, ever the strategist, began to think out loud. Mount Weather's entrance is heavily fortified, but there's an old network of service tunnels running underneath. They were built during the Cold War, designed to withstand a nuclear blast. If we can access them, we might be able to bypass the main security systems and get into the lower levels.
Ghost nodded. There's an access point off the Appalachian Trail. It's been sealed for years, but I know how to get in. Once inside, we'll need to move quickly. The lower levels are a labyrinth, no maps, no guides, just us and whatever's down there.
Emily studied the map in front of her, trying to piece together the fragments of information. And once we're in, what's our goal? We find the lab, we find the president, Porter, Jack, and Sarah.
Yes, Ghost replied. But it won't be that simple. The lab is where the real dangers are. The experiments have created anomalies, things that don't belong in our world. You'll need to be prepared for anything.
Stefan, his voice filled with resolve, looked at Emily. We've been through worse, we'll get them back. But we need to be smart about this. Once we're inside, communication will be limited. We'll need to rely on each other.
Emily nodded, the gravity of their mission sinking in. We've come this far. We're not stopping now. Let's get ready.
Ghost handed Stefan a small device no bigger than a smartphone. This will help you navigate once we're inside. It's a prototype, something they've been working on to map the anomalies. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing.
Stefan took the device and pocketed it. We leave at dawn. Pack light, move fast. We're going into the lion's den.
As they prepared to leave, Emily's thoughts were filled with the enormity of the task ahead. Mount Weather was more than just a facility, it was a gateway to the unknown. And somewhere within its depths, the people they cared about were waiting to be found. The road ahead was perilous, but there was no turning back. Emily, Stefan, and Ghost were about to embark on a journey into the heart of darkness, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. What they would find at Mount Weather was a mystery, but one thing was certain: this was only the beginning of a new, dangerous chapter in their quest.
Chapter 9, The Royal Enclave. The walls shimmered with a faint luminescence, casting an ethereal glow over the hallways as President Holden stepped through the towering archway. He felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. This place, this echo, as he had overheard some call it, was both alien and familiar. The air hummed with an energy that was almost palpable, as if the very fabric of reality was thinner here, more malleable. He had been escorted through a series of winding corridors, each more opulent than the last, by a silent, stern-faced attendant dressed in what appeared to be a ceremonial uniform, though its design was unlike anything Holden had seen before. However, the insignia caught his eye. Two interlocking circles, one dark, the other light, forming a symbol that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. The attendant stopped abruptly, turning to face him with a measured bow.
"The steward will see you now, Mr. President,"
he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Holden nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment. The twins were a mystery, an enigma wrapped in layers of secrecy, known only by whispered rumors and fleeting glimpses in classified reports. Meeting them directly seemed almost impossible. They were said to be the true power behind the throne, the rulers of this dimension, or whatever this place was. Holden knew he was walking into a carefully orchestrated dance, one that required precision and caution. The door before him, carved from dark wood that seemed to absorb the light, swung open without a sound. The room beyond was vast, dominated by a long table made of a material that seemed to shift in color depending on the angle from which it was viewed. At the far end of the table stood the steward, a figure dressed in deep indigo robes that draped over his lean frame, the same interlocking circles stitched in silver thread on his chest.
"Good morning, President Holden."
The steward intoned, his voice carrying an accent Holden couldn't quite place, though it seemed to blend ancient tones with something more modern, perhaps a relic of their world.
"Welcome to the Royal Enclave."
Holden stepped forward, feeling the coolness of the floor seep through his shoes. The chamber, though richly adorned with tapestries and artifacts that hinted at a deep history, lacked the warmth of any place he had known. It was as if the echo itself was an echo of the real world, a reflection, but with a strange distortion of reality. The twins Holden began, carefully choosing his words. "I understand they are not easily accessible. I appreciate the honor of this meeting." The steward's face remained inscrutable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition.
"Their Excellencies are indeed selective with their audiences. However, they have watched you for some time. Your presence here is both expected and necessary."
Holden had dealt with world leaders, dignitaries, and military brass, but this was different. The way the steward spoke, the reverence in his tone when mentioning the twins, hinted at a power dynamic far more complex than he had anticipated. "I am prepared to meet them," Holden said, steadying himself. "I wish to understand more about this place. The Echo, as it's called." The steward's eyes narrowed slightly, a sign that Holden had touched on something significant.
So you've heard that term. Few from your, what we call the overlap, are aware of our lexicon."
Overlap, Holden thought, letting the term settle. It was clear now how they viewed his world as merely a layer, a crossing point. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was unsettling. "Yes," he replied, "I have. It raises many questions." The steward nodded, motioning for Holden to follow him through another set of doors at the far end of the chamber.
"Questions that you will have the opportunity to ask directly. But first, there are things you must see, understand, before you can meet their Excellencies. They do not reveal themselves to those unworthy of their knowledge."
The doors led to a terrace, overlooking a sprawling landscape that defied logic. Below, a garden stretched out in every direction, filled with flora that shimmered and pulsed seemingly with a light all their own. Above, the sky was a swirl of colors, hints of indigo, violet, and a deep blue. The atmosphere itself felt alive, as if breathing in time with the land below. "Beautiful," Holden murmured, caught off guard by the surreal beauty of it all.
"Indeed," the steward replied, stepping to the edge of the terrace. "What you see here is the heart of our world, the Royal Enclave, where the twins have resided for centuries. It is a place of great power, where the lines between the Echo and the Overlap blur."
Holden was quiet, taking in the immensity of it all. He had been briefed, of course, on the dimensional overlap, on the strange occurrences that had baffled scientists and military strategists alike for decades. But nothing had prepared him for this, for the sheer scale and majesty of what lay before him. "Why did you bring me here, specifically?" Holden asked after a moment, turning to face the steward.
"Because the steward said, you are about to make a decision that will alter the course of both our worlds. The twins have chosen you, President Holden, as the one who will bridge the Echo and the Overlap to guide us into a new era."
Before Holden could respond, there was a movement at the far end of the terrace, where a set of grand doors began to open. The steward stepped back, bowing deeply.
"Prepare yourself, Mr. President," he whispered. "You are about to meet the true rulers of the Echo."
Holden took a deep breath, every instinct telling him that nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead. As the doors swung open fully, revealing the figures within, he realized just how right he was. The room was vast and shimmering, its walls adorned with flowing, iridescent panels. At the center, on a raised platform, sat the two senior members of the royal family in the Echo, the twins, their Majesties Dunay and Denial. Their presence was palpable, a mix of grace and authority that commanded respect. Their eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to pierce through Holden, as if they could see right through his intentions. It was clear that this was no ordinary meeting, it was an encounter that could reshape the future of both their worlds. Holden stepped forward, his voice steady but tinged with the uncertainty that came from facing the unknown. "Your Excellencies, I come to you with a proposal, one that could bring lasting peace between our worlds." The twins regarded him in silence for a moment, their expressions unreadable. It was Dunay who spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of centuries.
Peace is a word often spoken, but seldom understood. The last time the Echo sought peace with the Overlap, it ended in devastation for our people.
Danielle's gaze remained fixed on Holden, and when she spoke, it was with a calm authority that matched her sister's.
Your world responded to our approach with a force that nearly wiped us out. Since then, we have ruled with that memory seared into the hearts of our people.
Holden nodded, aware of the briefings he had received, but sensing that there was more to the story. "I know of the failed invasion of the 10,000 Iron Guards who crossed into the Overlap." He began cautiously, "but I do not know all that transpired. I wish to understand, to learn from the past so we do not repeat it."
The twins exchanged a glance, a silent communication that passed between them before they turned their focus back to Holden. "What you know is only part of the story," Dunay said, her tone softening slightly. "Our ancestors believed that the Overlap was a realm ripe for conquest, a place where our dominion could be extended. But they underestimated the Overlap's strength."
Daniel continued. "When our forces crossed over, they were met with a retaliation so swift and devastating that it shattered our ambitions. The Iron Guard was decimated, and our ruler, the head of the guard, was overthrown."
Dunay leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving Holden's. "Since then, the Echo has turned inward, wary of opening the door to the Overlap again. We have ruled in the shadow of that defeat, knowing that another attempt could bring about our destruction."
Holden listened intently, realizing the depth of the fear and caution that guided the twins' rule. "I understand your hesitation," he said carefully. "But today we face new challenges. The Overlap is not the same world you once knew. I am here not as a conqueror, but as a diplomat. I believe we can find a way to coexist, to build trust and work together." The twins remained silent for a long moment, their sharp eyes continuing to assess Holden. Then, Dunay spoke, her voice carrying both warning and possibility.
"Trust is not easily given, President Holden, especially when the stakes are so high."
And yet Daniel added, "We are not without hope. If we are to move forward, it must be with great care. The past has shown us the cost of recklessness. We must ensure that history does not repeat itself. Hiroshima can never be repeated. But as you know, the Iron Guard is still out there. We fear that an attack from them might bring consequences for the Echo."
"Do you agree that we stand together to ensure that does not happen? Can the Overlap count on your continued support?"
"First we try, then we trust. The leader of the Iron Guard, a warrior prince named Bismarck, find his stronghold in Vahalik Valley. It is one of 3 nexus points they control. Make sure they never use it. That should give us some reassurance."
"SEAL Team 6 will be briefed in the morning, Your Majesty." The steward motions to remind him to bow and back away. A collective sigh of relief is heard from the staff as the doors close.